Contentment seems kind of hard to come by these days. It's definitely hard to come by for me at work right now. Some of you probably know that I work as a backroom stalker at Walmart, and since Walmart has been deemed an essential business, we've stayed open in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Still waiting on that essential worker bonus, but I don't really think it's coming. Anyway, there's been a lot higher demand for a lot of the things we sell. A lot of people are baking, and I haven't seen active dry yeast in literally months. The shelves of disinfectant are routinely empty. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me if we have Clorox wipes in the back, I probably wouldn't be working at Walmart. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. But it seems that this crisis has bred discontentment in a great deal of us. We get scared of what might be or what could be, and suddenly the things we have just aren't enough anymore. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be prepared in the face of disaster, but we take it to this weird extreme. Like, I haven't seen any kind of beef other than a couple tubes of ground beef over in the meat section of the store. Now, granted, I don't know how to cook a steak in the first place, but still. And the more I think about it, contentment boils down to 3 key factors. But before we get into what those factors are, I want to take you guys over to Philippians chapter 1, verses 21 through 26. It says this: "For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ Jesus will abound on account of me." When we look at this, one of the first things we see is Paul's resignation. He talks about how his death would put him with Jesus and just how much better that is for him. But he understands that God's will is for him to stay and to help the early church prosper. So he resigns himself and says, "I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith." Another place in the Bible we can find resignation is in Esther chapter 4. At this point, Haman has just convinced Xerxes to sign his plot to basically exterminate the Jews. Mordecai is on his way to convince his cousin Esther to talk to Xerxes about it. In verse 11, it says, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." This passage is a little bit weird for me. Every time I read this, I have to sort of remind myself that these stakes still apply to Esther even though she's the queen. I mean, it seems like she should have some sort of immunity, right? And of course, I know how the story ends, so I have to fight past that and remember just how high these stakes were. Even though I know that at the end, the plot is revealed and Xerxes reverses it. I have to remind myself that there wasn't just one queen or one wife or one partner for Xerxes, and Esther very well could have died when she approached Xerxes. But in verse 16, she finally says to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." She resigns herself, and she says, "If I die, I die, and that's okay." And of course, like I said, we already know that Xerxes doesn't sentence her. He accepts her invitation to dinner, and at that dinner she reveals Haman's plot to kill Mordecai and Esther. I try my best to practice this resignation at work when I can, but it is really hard. Because when I give myself up, when I resign myself, it usually means I'm staying 30, 45 minutes. I think the latest I've stayed was an hour and a half past the end of my shift doing the work that we should have already finished. And I know that's not really that much in the grand scheme of things, but you guys gotta understand that my shift ends at 11 o'clock at night. So if I'm there till 12:30, 12:40, I'm getting home almost at 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, I'm not saying that to brag on myself here. I've snuck out at 10:58 way more times than I would like to admit. But that does lead into the second part of contentment, which is sacrifice. Back in Philippians 4, after Paul talks about how much better it would be to be with Christ, he says in verse 24, "But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body." So Paul is in prison at this time. He's been arrested for speaking the gospel and teaching people about Jesus. And it would just be so easy for him to just give up and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to die here in prison. The church will be fine on his own. Instead, he says, I know how important and integral God has made me for the early church. So I have to push on. And you got to remember, the importance of sacrifice is far from lost on Paul. In his letter to the Roman church, he tells them, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." And in Ephesians chapter 5, he writes, "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." In my house, pretty much every single one of us loves this band from, I believe, Australia called For King and Country. The first time I ever heard a song by these guys was either towards the very end of my freshman year or the very beginning of my sophomore year of high school. Dad showed Lainey and me a video of their live performance of their song called The Proof of Your Love. And the integral lyrics of that song are, "So let my life be the proof of your love. Let my love look like you and what you're made of. How you lived, how you died. Love is sacrifice. So let my life be the proof of your love." I think it was my junior year when we decided that their song, Fix My Eyes, is our family's anthem of sorts. The singer talks about how if he could go back and stand face to face with a younger version of himself, he would love like I'm not scared, give when it's not fair, live life for another, take time for a brother, fight for the weak ones, speak out for freedom, find faith in the battle, stand tall, and above it all, fix my eyes on you. Of course, when we don't know what will happen, like we do in the case of Esther, or we can't really be content with sacrifice without this one final important element, which is trust in God. Further down in verse 27, Paul writes, "Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one Spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel." Paul has no idea what in the world is going to happen next, but he's okay at that. I'm reminded of a song Dad referenced a few weeks ago by an artist named John Bellion called Maybe IDK, where he says, "Maybe I don't know, but maybe that's okay." So maybe Paul didn't know, but maybe that's okay. My absolute favorite example of trust in God throughout the entire Bible is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3. It says, "King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates, and all of the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. That has got to be one of the ultimate examples of trusting in God. And it does pay off for them in the form of getting them rescued from the furnace. But I'm not going to read that part right now, because I want you to consider this phrase. Even if it's not okay, it's okay. I know that doesn't make a ton of sense at face value, but what I'm really trying to say here is that God is in control, and his plan will be done one way or another. This became one of my cornerstones after my grandfather had his accident. Most of you know that we faced, for lack of a better word, trials of every single kind whenever he was in poor health and after his accident. When he lost feeling and movement in both his legs, I told myself, even if it's not okay, it's okay. When he got confused a week after I got there, when he refused his medication, when he slapped a cup of water out of my dad's hand, and when he thought he was dying, I tried to remember, even if it's not okay, it's okay. When he had to go to the emergency room repeatedly because of high fever or dehydration or because he kept getting confused or whatever may have been the case, I did my best to tell myself, even if it's not okay, it's okay. When his health declined even further after his surgery to alleviate his pain that came after eating, I reminded myself over and over, even if it's not okay, it's okay. And when he passed away a month and a half later, after asking me to play his old fiddle at his funeral, and the 2 of us told each other, "I love you," more times than I can remember, I desperately tried to convince myself that even if it's not okay, it's okay. Well, church, I'm standing in front of you now to let you know that even if it's not okay, and right now it definitely isn't, it's still okay. God is still in control, and he wants us to live in his peaceful contentment through this chaotic and confusing time. He asks us to sacrifice our excessive worrying and preparation, because can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to his life? He asks us to resign ourselves to him, and give ourselves up to his purposes so he can fix our eyes on him. And most of all, he asks us to trust him and remember who he is, the loving creator of the universe, who still has a plan and is still in control. And he wants us to remember that even if it's not okay, it's okay. Let's pray. God, we thank you for peace even in this crazy time. I pray, Lord, that you will help us to resign ourselves to you, to say, my life is not my own. It's yours now, God. Do with me what you will. I pray that you'll help us to sacrifice ourselves, sacrifice our worry. And I pray that you will help us to trust in you more and more every day. I pray that you will help bring us peace, and that you will help us to trust in you and help us to be content in you. In your name we pray, Lord. Amen.